Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Gabon junta grants ousted President Ali Bongo freedom of movement, citing health concerns. Horror as Rwandan police arrest 34-year-old suspected serial killer. The last headline was a shocking development in Kenya where police uncover over 20 trafficked Ethiopian women. Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in Gabon, where the military leaders have announced that ousted President Ali Bongo is free to move about and pursue medical treatment abroad. In a communique read on state television, military spokesperson Colonel Ulrich Malfumbi said the decision to free Mr. Bongo was due to his state of health. Mr. Bongo has been detained at his official residence since he was overthrown by his presidential guard on August the 30th, ending his family's 56-year rule over the oil-producing Central African nation. Gabon's coup has raised concerns about a contagion of military takeovers across the region that have erased democratic progress made in the last 2 decades. And Rwandan police have arrested a 34-year-old suspected serial killer who is alleged to have murdered and buried more than 10 bodies in his kitchen. According to the police, more than 10 decomposing bodies have been exhumed, and the identities of the victims are yet unknown. The police found out about the murders when asked to evict him from his house in Kikukiro district in Kigali for defaulting on rent. The man confessed to luring his victims from bars, robbing, then killing and burying them in a hole he had dug up in his kitchen. However, the suspect has not commented in court on the allegations and is yet to be formally charged as investigations continue into the shocking incident. Let's head over to Kenya now, where the police have also found 26 Ethiopian women locked up in an uncompleted building in the central town of Muranga. Human traffickers had kept the women in a partially built structure for about a week with just a single mattress on the floor. The traffickers, who brought their captives over to a Moyal border point, confiscated their passports and mobile phones. The raid took place on Monday night on the small house. It was discovered that the hoodlums had planned to take the victims onto South Africa. The owner and guard of the house have been arrested as the search for the traffickers continues. To the conflict in Sudan now, the United States has targeted a top Sudanese paramilitary official in the highest profile use of sanctions since the crisis began in April this year. According to officials, the United States sanctioned the Rapid Support Forces deputy leader, Abdurrahim Dagalo, over human rights abuse, sexual violence and killings based on ethnicity during the group's clash with the Sudanese army. The move comes in a response to the deadly violence seen recently in West Darfur, which the RSF is accused of perpetrating along with allied militias. Abdurrahim Dagalo, brother of RSF commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hamdeti, is the first official on either side to be sanctioned since the start of the war. Meanwhile, Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi has called on Sudan's rival factions to work towards an immediate ceasefire and end the conflict that has killed and displaced thousands since April. The UN Refugee Agency said it expected over 1.8 million people from Sudan to arrive in 5 neighboring countries by the end of the year and appealed for $1 billion in aid to reduce the rising disease and death rates. More than 1 million people have already left Sudan for neighboring Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Central African Republic.
Japan is also serious with regard to the situation in Sudan. Japan, together with Egypt and other countries, will continue to call on the parties to the conflict for an immediate ceasefire and the transition to civilian rule. Japan is also seriously concerned about the deterioration of humanitarian situation in Sudan and has been providing assistance was approximately 92 million US dollars to Sudan and neighboring countries. We are also concerned about heightened tensions between Israel and Palestine. We appreciate Egypt's positive efforts, including hosting Palestinian factions for reconciliation. Japan will provide emergency grant aid worth 1 million US dollars through UNRWA, as well as food assistance worth approximately 1.4 million US dollars through WFP to the people of Palestine. Furthermore, Japan values the role of multinational force and observers for peace and stability in the Middle East. Japan has been contributing financially and sending 4 ground self-defense force officers on duty to the MFO.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan and the United Nations Development Programme recently organized a 3-day national conference which brought traditional chiefs and local government representatives together to discuss how the role of traditional leaders in resolving local conflicts can be strengthened. Members of the Council of Traditional Authorities and Leaders have already been able to carry out some peace-building activities, including mediations, negotiations and dialogues. But more is needed for feuding communities to live in peace with each other.
Most important is to establish the councils. If we have established these councils according to the law, whether it is the Constitution or the Local Government Act, these chiefs will play a very important role in our society.
While we are moving towards developing the Constitution, it is important to create this awareness that the traditional authorities have a significant role in ensuring peace and tranquility in the communities.
With only 16 months remaining before the elections, it has become increasingly important for the parties to the peace agreement to expedite the implementation of the key outstanding benchmarks so that free, fair, and peaceful elections could be conducted according to schedule. The traditional leaders have a very important role to play in this nation-building exercise.
Elsewhere now, the wife of former Zambia President Edgar Lungu has been released from police custody until she appears in court. The release comes after Mrs. Lungu was arrested on 3 charges, including theft of a motor vehicle. She was detained alongside 4 others. They were also accused of being in possession of property believed to be proceeds of crime. Several former ministers, government officials, and Mr. Lungu's family members are currently under investigation for suspected criminal activities. They, however, denied any wrongdoing. Back to Kenya and our story on the raid on a house that found women trafficked. They're believed to be Ethiopian national. We now speak to Kenyan journalist Cyrus Ombati, who joins us virtually from Nairobi, the Kenyan capital. Hello, Cyrus. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Hello, in Nigeria.
Right. So tell us more, what has been discovered about how the women got to be trafficked in the first place? Were they trying to go, go for better living conditions?
Well, thank you so much for having me on this show, because this is the latest group which has been found actually being trafficked out of Ethiopia through Kenya to either Middle East or South Africa. And because last week, actually, we had a similar number, 71 of them being again found in a very horrible situation somewhere out of Nairobi. And they are waiting to be trafficked out of Nairobi again to South Africa. What's puzzling is how these people are being trafficked from Ethiopia through Kenyan border, then to Nairobi, where they usually wait to be taken out of the country after paying some amount.
Right. Do we know the, age range of these women?
Well, they say that they are aged between 22 and 32 years old. Another challenge the police had is the language barrier, because these women were speaking Amharic and Kenyan police actually speak only Swahili and English. So it was a problem in communicating with the women who are being arrested. So they had to look for a translator to help them kind of communicating with the women and to express themselves where they're headed to. So they were taken to custody, to police custody ahead of arraignment. Then there will be arrangement probably for their own, for their deportation back to Ethiopia. And that will take, again, almost a month or so. So it means that such kind of women, some of them we are told were pregnant, could be again be ending up in a jail or somewhere in custody, police custody, which are horrible conditions before they are deported back to the country.
Yeah, what kind of policing arrangement takes place in Kenya? Here in Nigeria, we know there's, community policing, and communities, are involved in the system, whereby if they say something is wrong, they, immediately alert the authorities. So how did the police get to know the whereabouts of the women and that there was a possible trafficking situation?
Actually, when you find women in a room which was unfinished, it's under construction. So the locals actually spotted these people and said they look so much kind of different from the locals. They could not communicate. Some of them were getting out of their rooms, going for short calls and long calls. So it drew the attention of the locals. That's how they managed to call the police. Even most of the places where they are usually arrested in Nairobi or they're found in Nairobi, you find them confined to 1 or 2 rooms. You find a group of around 30 or so, 50, confined to 1 or 2 rooms waiting for their movement. They smuggled probably from Nairobi down to Tanzania, then to South Africa, or to probably from South Africa. That's where they can also fly to Ethiopia or to rather Dubai and other countries. So the locals are the ones usually inform the police there are strangers here, so come and talk to them, because they cannot be able to express themselves in English or Swahili, which is a common language here.
Right. We did say that, we understand that the women were possibly heading to South Africa. Is this a common occurrence in Kenya? Is South Africa, a favored route for, possible, trafficking situations?
Yeah, we are sure. They say that they were headed to South Africa, and most of those people arrested before, they also usually say they are headed to South Africa. Apparently, South Africa is a big market for this such kind of group, and few are usually headed for Middle East, like Qatar and Saudi Arabia or Dubai. But then most of those people arrested here in Nairobi, they usually come to Nairobi before they are shipped out of the country through Tanzania, then Mozambique. So it's not new. That's what usually happens here.
Right. So what kind of condition are the women in, medically? Has there been a translator? You mentioned that, they did not really speak the local language. Has there been a translator? Have the women, said anything about their condition? Do they want to go back home? What kind of arrangements are being made for them?
They are saying they had paid for them to come to Nairobi, so they want to leave Ethiopia. They were pleading with the police to leave them, but then the police cannot leave them to just go like that. So the police had to get a translator. The police informed them that now they are here illegally, because for you to come to Nairobi from Addis, you have to get something like a visa. So they were informed they will be processed through the court, then they will be deported back to their country. A translator came from the embassy, who is now helping the kind of the processes. They are currently in custody, police custody, which is not a good condition for them, but most of them, because these are women, and some of them we are told they are pregnant in a way. So it's a wait and see so far as it stands.
Right. Cyrus, thank you for your time and for expanding that discussion for us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up after the break, Pope Francis prays for victims of deadly South Africa fire. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Over in Egypt, it seems a population explosion is causing some concerns. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says that the country needs to slow its annual birth rate to avoid a catastrophe. He said that Egypt has to lower its annual births to 400,000 from the current more than 2 million for the country to effectively provide jobs and social services to its citizens. President al-Sisi also faulted remarks by Khaled Abdel Ghaffar, Egypt's health and population minister, that having children is a matter of complete freedom. He hinted that Egypt could emulate China's one-child policy, citing the result as a success. Since the year 2000, the population of Egypt, one of Africa's most populous countries, has grown by 14 million to reach 105 million people. Africa's first ever climate summit wrapped up yesterday in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in sustainable development projects have been announced during the meeting. This next report looks at the major highlights of the just concluded three-day summit.
Honourable Ministers, the Africa Climate Summit, which opened on Monday, September the 4th in Nairobi, Kenya, is focused on mobilizing financing for the continent's response to climate change. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Kenyan President William Ruto officially launched the Green Hydrogen Strategy and Roadmap for Kenya on Tuesday. The roadmap, a joint project with the EU, set out the country's ambitions for green hydrogen industry until 2032. While the bloc will fund nearly 12 million euros in grants to help with public and private investment for the sector. Ms. Ursula von der Leyen states that the EU is committed to help Africa tackle climate change, while Mr. Ruto reiterates the need for conversation about carbon tax.
This is a win-win partnership which benefits Africa and the world. For instance, the benefits of expanding Africa's clean energy sector would be massive. By speeding up the transition to solar and wind power, energy sector jobs in Africa could double in a few years. And Africa could produce enough clean energy not only to power up your continent, but also to export abroad.
To be able to unlock the resources that we need to be able to drive these new investment and financing opportunities, especially for green energy. We believe it is time to have a conversation about carbon tax. I said we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. And I mean we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. Yes. We believe it is the only way, it is among the ways that we can raise additional and adequate resources for us to finance our development.
COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber announced the UAE was pledging $4.5 billion to develop 15 gigawatts of clean power in Africa by 2030.
The Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, Etihad Credit Insurance, Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, and EMEA Power will join with Africa 50 as a strategic partner under the guidance of the UAE and African leadership to develop 15 gigawatt of clean power by 2030. Working together, we will deploy, and by working together, we will deploy $4.5 billion that will catalyze at least an additional $12.5 billion from multilateral public and private sources.
Similarly, the CEO of United Arab Emirates Renewable Energy Company, Master, Mohammed Al-Ramahi, says that the UAE's ultimate goal was to provide power to the people of Africa at the most competitive price.
Our ambition is not only to accelerate renewable energy. Ultimately, we want to provide electrons to the people at the most competitive price. That is our ultimate goal.
For the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, developed countries must ensure the financial commitment to developing countries are fulfilled.
Developed countries must present a clear and credible roadmap to double adaptation finance by 2025 as a first step towards devoting at least half of all climate finance to adaptation. And they must also keep their promise to provide $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate support and fully replenish the Green Climate Fund.
Germany also announced 450 million euros in financing, including 60 million for green hydrogen projects in Kenya, and the United States committed $30 million to supporting climate resilience and food security efforts.
And Uganda relies on coffee as one of its biggest sources of foreign exchange, and it's also a key source of livelihood for many households. But lack of rainfall has reduced the production drastically. However, Ugandan coffee farmer Alan Green has found a way around combating the effects of climate change when it comes to crop production by using modern technology. Take a listen.
The soil is very... Ugandan coffee farmer Alan Green is deploying modern technology like drip irrigation and artificial mulching to beat the effects of climate change, which is making production of the crop increasingly tougher in Africa's top exporter of the bean. Farmers like Green provide insights into what technologies are working in Africa and how they can be leveraged to overcome the effects of climate change in countries like Uganda, where traditional rain patterns are shifting and some areas are turning drier and less favorable to coffee growing.
This creates a microclimate under here, as you can see. At night, when due to evaporation and transpiration, the dew that's created under here in the morning drops back onto the ground and keeps that area moist through the day. So much as it's raining, the water that drops here will not easily evaporate. So when you work this out over 2 years for these young trees, they're going to grow, their root zone is going to be under a very nice climate, as opposed to one using a hoe to do spot weeding, because the roots of coffees are very close to the ground. So for me, this artificial mulch has been honestly a game changer. I would not do a large area without them. So it helps you worry more about on the side than worry about here, until it grows into a tree and creates a canopy with the next one. Then I move it.
Coffee farmers in Uganda say rains are starting late or earlier than they traditionally did, and sometimes they're below normal but too intense and destructive, while droughts are getting longer and harsher. To grow coffee successfully in Uganda, now Green said the farmer must invest in climate mitigation measures, especially irrigation systems, to help keep the plant healthy when rains fail or are too short.
2019 we had a longer dry period. The rains came in about November. So that unpredictability makes the farmer's life impossible. You can't plan, you can't grow. For us here, it has never gone back to that. So it's only going to worsen. I don't know what next year brings. I don't know when the next rain will be. But once you have water and you can mitigate this as much as possible, then the crop will not suffer.
Green established his Wells Coffee Farm in 2021 and expects his first harvest of the beans by November. He says his ambition is to plant 1,000 acres. Nearby, a 15 million litre water reservoir helps supply him with water that a solar-powered pump helps deliver to the plant in drips via pipes crisscrossing the farm. Green, who is financing his farm partly with a loan, said policymakers and governments needed to prioritize finding a way to provide farmers with cheap and long-term credit to help farmers afford the technologies needed to blunt the effects of climate change.
Imagine if all this times. So, as for example, maybe supposed to do.
We have updates from the Johannesburg building fire. Pope Francis has offered his prayers for victims of last week's deadly blaze. Hundreds of Christian faithful gathered in the Vatican City outside St. Peter's Square, where the Pope led the prayers. The pontiff was quoted as saying that it was with deep sorrow that I learned of the fire that broke out in a 5-story building in the city centre of Johannesburg in South Africa, in which more than 70 people died, including several children. I invite you to join me in praying for the victims To the family members, I express my deep condolences and I send a special blessing for them and for those who are working to provide assistance and support. The devastating incident highlighted a housing crisis in a city that's one of the world's most unequal and where poverty and unemployment are widespread. That's Network Africa Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.